Hello, this is Father Simeon, and today I want to talk a little bit informally about missions. Planting churches, to use that image of a tree being planted deeply in the ground and with a strong root system that grows and flourishes and produces fruit. To use that image, a tree uh, is planted and a mission, a church is planted for the purpose of changing lives. And it's different than just starting a church. Sometimes churches are started because you have a number of Orthodox Christians in a place, there is no church there, or there is a church that the physical boundaries of the building are such that you need to physically grow, and you find that some of those congregants can build a church somewhere else. This is a church specifically for not only the people who are there, but has the specific purpose of reaching people who are outside of the church, of casting the net and bringing as many people into fellowship with God as possible. So these are a few principles that I thought of as I reflected on missions and my many years of interest in missions and evangelism, cross-cultural missions and evangelism, and missions and evangelism here in the United States. And the first thing is we need to keep mission momentum. People have drifted farther and farther from the spiritual life in our culture. We have a lot of young people who really want to enact societal change. They see the problems in our society, but they don't really understand that underlying diagnosis, the real problem, which really we all share within ourselves. And all of this provides opportunity for people to hear the gospel, for people to be united with Christ's church. And the Apostle Paul's mission from Antioch in Syria is one that those of us who are Antiochians are still doing right now. What we're doing in the United States is a continuation of St. Paul's mission. And we're not just an American branch of a church in Syria, but we are an American church. We are people who are working in this land to build up the Orthodox Church in this land. We still have these strong roots with our mother churches. And to be part of the biblical ancient Church of Antioch inspires me in order to continue that mission of St. Paul. But really, all of us, no matter what our canonical jurisdiction, we are all here doing the work of St. Paul in this country to make Orthodoxy a native plant here, so that it is a church of Americans and for Americans. And we need more Orthodox churches, more parishes. Since we live in the United States, we need American churches. And what does this mean? It doesn't mean that we need just more white churches. It doesn't mean churches that we say we've decided what American culture is and no cultures are allowed here. What it does mean is that a foreign culture does not dominate these churches. So that when you plant a new church, if you are an American, you feel like it will never be your church because you have a constant reminder that it seems to belong to people who have a cultural connection from other parts of the world. So we don't need evangelistic churches to be Greek or Russian or Syrian or anything else. We need American churches where Greeks and Russians and Syrians and Lebanese and Appalachians and African Americans and Chinese and Kenyans and Mexicans and everybody can come under the same roof and worship together, and everyone's cultural expression is welcome. And we can share our common heritage as Americans together as well. And there are times that so many people from a particular part of the world may gather in a particular geographic location, and there is a need to found a church that reflects that very particular ethnicity. If we had a large number of people from Mexico here in Texas and they became Orthodox and they just don't speak English, then it would reflect Mexican culture, right? Uh, but here in Houston, one of the most culturally diverse cities in the United States, we can have churches that reflect all kinds of cultures because that is who will be coming to the churches if we are spreading out this net broadly, people from all over. So we want an American church that reflects cultural diversity, right? It doesn't mean that you're pushing out any culture, but that you can celebrate everything. So uh, every year, my family, we have a Chinese New Year party if we can, right? To reflect Chinese culture. Chinese culture will not dominate the church, but it is certainly welcome. And there's so many other people from different cultural backgrounds, and let's embrace it all and bring it into the church. Part of what being an American church means, in most cases, would be using a common language. We speak English. And if you look at a culturally diverse congregation, English is usually the language that everybody speaks. Some people may speak Arabic, some people may speak Spanish, people may speak Russian, some people may speak Chinese, but everybody there will probably speak English. And the question about language then is done. There's no reason. We don't speak language because of some sort of nostalgia, but we speak a particular language in order to communicate the faith. And even if we're doing something in 95% English, what about the 5% that most of the people aren't understanding? Why are we doing that? Now, these are principles. There's always an exception, and every priest has to look at his congregation and the people that are there and decide exactly what to do in a very particular situation. You know, we do a lot of litanies in the church, so there are always opportunities for using a foreign language with a phrase that is repeated so often everybody knows what it means, and everybody can learn it. That is part of the congregation in a way that if someone comes in who only speaks English, they're not going to feel like there's some kind of cultural barrier, that they'll never belong there unless they somehow embrace some other type of culture. And like I said, there are always exceptions. As I mentioned, if we had people from Mexico or other parts of South America here in Texas who wanted to be Orthodox and they did not speak English, then we would be doing all Spanish in that congregation, I would imagine. So these are just basic principles. Something else is we really need to be centrally accessible, or think about being centrally accessible. You know, as cities expand, we often think that with the expansion, as new communities are formed around the city, that we build new churches. And yet, what we often do is ignore the central city. Now, there are many times existing large churches inside a city. But the question is, are those established churches really doing evangelism for the people who are inside the central part of the city? Many times they're enormous congregations that are stretched taking care of their own communities, if they're very large communities. So even in central cities, there are certainly opportunities for more mission work. And if we put churches centrally, then central cities tend to be more common territory for everybody in a greater urban area. And people may be more likely to come toward the city rather than go out into somebody else's neighborhood. You know, again, every city is a little bit different. I live in Houston, Texas, which has an enormous central part with a high population, with a lot of work to do in a very multi-ethnic and multicultural context. Something else to consider is being the church of the neighborhood. Trying to be a church, that will be central and draw people, and yet not just be what can be called a destination church, where there aren't any people that are around the church that actually go to the church. Everybody drives in from these long distances, and we need to really consider trying to be a church for the people who are there in the surrounding community. Sometimes we put churches kind of really out where the land is cheap. And we need to think about also where the mission field is rich when we put a congregation. So we want to consider this when we think about missions, about the placement of missions. There's nothing wrong as the cities expand, putting missions there. I have an interest also in small town and rural missions. Those are very different than the context now. I'm a West Virginian from rural Appalachia, so I have a lot of interest as well in putting missions in places where there are right now no Orthodox people, but that's what we do. I mean, what would the apostles do if they said, we can't go to this part of the world because there are no Orthodox people there? Of course there are no Orthodox people there. Right? They're all pagans, but that's the purpose of mission, is to make Orthodox Christians, right? And, we have to be innovative. We follow a tradition that does not change. And for the sake of our children, I'm glad when I became Orthodox that the Orthodox Church had kept whole and undefiled the apostolic tradition. That's what I needed. And that's exactly what I want to pass on to my children, that they can pass it on to their children. That's what I want to pass on to everybody, the tradition that does not change. And yet, in the world that we live in, we can use innovative communication in order to do everything we can. Sometimes we're really behind the curve. Everybody, since the pandemic, is using Zoom. That's not necessarily cutting edge technology. Sometimes we're really catching up. But we can really think about new ways of communicating the faith that never changes. Something else we want to think about is taking risk. There is always risk in founding missions, and we can take that risk sometimes. Right? We can throw seeds out broadly. Sometimes we want to make sure every box is checked. And thank God, we sometimes are extremely careful so that we don't make mistakes. And yet we don't want to make our fear of failure to keep us from doing what can produce fruit, right? A mission isn't about our pride in success, but loving the world in the name of Christ and drawing as many people into his apostolic church that God may embrace them and gather them under his wings. And if we really try to do this being wise, then we can take risk in faith and in love. There are ways that we can manage the risk. There are priests who may be bivocational, may have a full-time job in a particular place, or for some reason, they may be able to be involved in a mission project. That would make much more sense, right, than trying to take a priest who's out of seminary, who just to move into a city, into a risky sort of mission project. When you may have somebody there locally who can be involved in the project. You may have a large mother church that has a real mind for missions and can let the mission do the work it needs to do, but can just offer support, not necessarily financial support, but just support in helping this little mission realize that they're part of a larger community. And I can tell you, when you have a new church that has this purpose of bringing people that aren't Orthodox, it's helpful to have a church that does have a traditional ethnic connection to, in our case, as Antiochians, to the Middle East. It's beautiful being formed in that kind of environment. I was formed in that kind of environment myself, to worship along people who are from Lebanon, and Syria, and Palestine. It can be incredibly important. And even if you have a little mission starting, people that have no connection to those cultures, having a larger church, that sometimes there may be some interaction, can really, really be helpful. And also in the city, let's say a mission fails. If a mission fails, there is somewhere for people to go. They're not just out in the middle of nowhere without an Orthodox church anywhere. So we can take risk, but we also can be smart about it, and we can limit that risk. Sometimes we need to admit failure regarding a particular project. We need to reevaluate it and then maybe re-execute it and be resilient. One thing we need to constantly emphasize is this mission emphasis. So we emphasize the mission emphasis. We have to constantly remind people that we are here in order to heal our souls, and that we all are here in order to heal the souls of others. And we can't fall into this way of thinking that bringing other people in is we need other people in order to pay the bills. No, we need the people come in for their salvation. And if we bring people in for their salvation, right, and we share this life with them, then other aspects of the ministry will be taken care of. We need to really emphasize the mission parish as the temple where people gather and pray to meet the true and living God, the God who loves them. But there's something special about the place, even if the place is meeting in a storefront in the beginning. Right? We should not neglect to try to bring beauty into this space as much as we can, in a way that helps people realize by what they see the mystical reality of what the church really is, and emphasize that the church is a hospital with a comprehensive therapy to heal and transform the soul. That if we want to reach others, we need to reach ourselves. That we need to live out what we are inviting other people to. And this is what gives us credibility. When people see the signs and wonders have work in us, then they'll want what we have. And also emphasize the local parish as a center where we train children and parents and everyone else to live the fullness of the spiritual life practically every day in a world of chaos and confusion. Even if, like me, you have an 8-year-old child, you think in a decade, this child will be an adult. And how will I train this child so that this child can go to college, or this child can go away from home and can know how to live the life of prayer, the prayer of the church, privately, will know the importance of the life of the church community, and will know how to navigate the difficulties living in a culture that will likely misunderstand them and may be hostile to them. So when we think of education, we can't think of education in the parish as just imparting concepts, but more like military training, really training our children how to live. And one of the best ways to train children is to have parents that are willing to learn, that they can train their children, and that they are willing to live the life and be an example for their children. And for everyone who comes to the church, from the moment that a person comes in and becomes really serious in engaging in the process of catechism, that we present catechism not just teaching people about we believe this and this is church history for their minds, but really teaching them how to live the life of virtue, following the commandments of Christ, how to live that ascetic life of therapy, and how to live a life that is centered around the medicines of the church, the holy mysteries. We live in a big country, and we live in a big world. And there are so many opportunities for us to reach people with the gospel. And it may take a very long time to cultivate a congregation in these times. But let's not lose our mission momentum. But let's keep going on. Keep sailing as St. Paul did, and keep carrying on the mission of the church. And for us, the mission of Antioch. God bless you.